My name is Charmaine. I am 35 years old, and I am a senior financial auditor and investment manager. My family has always assumed I am just some low-level accountant barely scraping by. If you have ever had your own blood try to bleed you dry, if you have ever been treated like a burden by the same people who secretly rely on your success, please hit the like button and subscribe right now, because the revenge I served was ice cold, and what I did next left my toxic family with absolutely nothing. Let me tell you exactly how we ended up in that courtroom. It did not start with a massive legal battle. It started with a dinner, an absurd demand for cash, and the night I realized my mother never loved me. 3 months earlier, I was sitting at the massive mahogany dining table in my mother's sprawling Atlanta estate. The house was decorated to the nines. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and expensive art lined the walls. My mother Vivian always cared more about looking wealthy than actually building wealth. She hosted these elaborate Sunday dinners just to show off to the neighbors and pretend we were some flawless high society family. Sitting across from me was my younger sister Chloe. Chloe was 28 years old and the undeniable golden child of the family. She spent her days pretending to be a social media influencer, posting heavily edited pictures of her supposed luxury lifestyle. Next to her was her husband, Trey. Trey was a fast-talking 30-year-old who drove a leased Maserati and constantly bragged about his entrepreneurial ventures. In reality, Trey was a master manipulator who jumped from one failed get-rich-quick scheme to another. Throughout dinner, Trey was loudly swirling his wine glass and dropping buzzwords about blockchain and decentralized finance. My mother hung on to his every word, treating him like he was the next Steve Jobs. I quietly ate my salmon, knowing exactly where this conversation was heading. Whenever I was invited to these family dinners, it was never just to catch up. I was the family scapegoat, but I was also the only one with a steady, verifiable income. Sure enough, as the dessert plates were being cleared, my mother cleared her throat and tapped her spoon against her glass. She gave me a tight, artificial smile. Charmaine, sweetheart, Trey has a massive opportunity in front of him, a real game changer. Trey sat up straight, fixing the cuffs of his flashy designer shirt. Yes, Charmaine, I am launching a new crypto trading platform that uses AI algorithms to predict market shifts. We have investors lining up, but we need a bridge loan to cover the initial server costs and marketing rollout. My mother leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with greed. He only needs $150,000 to get it off the ground. The bank approved the business loan, but they need a co-signer with a flawless credit history and a corporate salary. Since you have that boring desk job, we knew you would be the perfect fit. You just need to sign the paperwork tomorrow morning. I stopped chewing my food and stared at her. They were not asking me. They were telling me. They genuinely expected me to put my name, my credit, and my financial future on the line for a man who had not held a legitimate job in 5 years. I wiped my mouth with a linen napkin and looked directly at Trey. You want me to co-sign a $150,000 loan for a crypto platform? Where is your business plan, Trey? Have you secured any actual venture capital, or is this just another one of your phantom projects? Chloe slammed her hand on the table, making her water glass rattle. Why are you interrogating him, Charmaine? You are just an accountant. You do not understand how tech startups work. He is going to make millions. I ignored her and kept my eyes locked on Trey. Actually, Chloe, I understand finances perfectly. Trey, if banks are so eager to fund you, why do they need a cosigner? A bridge loan implies you have guaranteed capital coming in. Who is the lead investor? What is your burn rate? How are you handling the SEC compliance for crypto trading in the state of Georgia? Trey shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his confident facade cracking. He started stammering out a word salad about disrupting the market and utilizing decentralized nodes. It was completely incoherent. I leaned back in my chair and crossed my arms. You do not have a business plan. You do not have investors. You want $150,000 of unsecured debt under my name so you can pay off whatever holes you have dug yourself into. The answer is absolutely not. I will not sign a single piece of paper for you. The dining room went dead silent. The kind of silence that signals an impending hurricane. My mother, Vivian, slowly stood up from her chair, her face contorted into a mask of pure rage. The elegant high society persona vanished completely, replaced by the vicious, bitter woman I had known my entire life. "How dare you speak to your brother-in-law like that?" My mother hissed, her voice trembling with anger. "He is family. He is trying to build a legacy for your sister, and you are sitting there acting like some arrogant Wall Street executive. You crunch numbers in a cubicle, Charmaine. You are nothing special." I stood up as well, refusing to back down. "If I am nothing special, then why do you need my signature, Mother? Why do you not co-sign the loan yourself? You live in this massive house. Use it as collateral." Vivian flinched. I knew exactly why she could not use the house as collateral, but she did not know that I knew. Chloe started fake crying, burying her face in Trey's shoulder. "She is just jealous of us, Mom. She has always been jealous because she is miserable and alone. She wants to see us fail." Trey wrapped an arm around Chloe and glared at me. "I thought you were family, Charmaine, but you are just a bitter hater. Keep your miserable little job. We do not need your help." "Then why did you ask?" I shot back. My mother snapped. She marched around the dining table, closed the distance between us, and slapped me hard across the face. The sharp crack echoed through the large room. My cheek burned, but I did not shed a single tear. I just stared at her, my expression completely blank. "You ungrateful little parasite!" my mother screamed, pointing a shaking finger at the front door. "I gave you life. I fed you. I clothed you. And the one time your family asks for a simple favor, you show us your true colors. You are selfish. You have always been a cold, calculating disappointment." She grabbed my expensive trench coat off the hallway rack and threw it violently at my chest. The heavy fabric hit me and fell to the hardwood floor. "Get out of my house!" she yelled, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Get out, and do not ever come back until you apologize to your sister and Trey. You are dead to me. You hear me? Dead to me." I calmly reached down and picked up my coat. I brushed the dust off the fabric. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I simply looked at them, convinced of their superiority. "You are right, Mother," I said quietly. "I am done." I turned around and walked out the heavy oak front door, stepping into the freezing Atlanta rain. The door slammed shut behind me. As I walked down the driveway, my phone buzzed. They thought they won the ultimate battle, but they did not realize they handed me the match to burn their fake empire down. I walked down the long, winding driveway of the estate, the cold rain soaking into my blouse. My mother probably assumed I would be hailing a rideshare at the gate, shivering in the storm, desperately regretting my defiance. She thought I would be checking into some budget motel off the highway, crying myself to sleep over her rejection. She was entirely wrong. Waiting for me just outside the heavy iron gates was my private driver, standing attentively next to my matte black Mercedes Maybach. I slid into the heated leather seats and instructed him to take me home. Home was not a cramped apartment or a cheap hotel like I had let my family believe for the past decade. Home was a 5,000 square foot luxury penthouse in the heart of Midtown Atlanta, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city skyline. I had bought it in cash 3 years ago. I kept my true wealth meticulously hidden because I knew exactly who my mother and sister were. If they knew I was an executive managing billions in private equity, they would have bled me dry years ago. I rode the private secure elevator directly up to my floor, poured myself a glass of expensive red wine, and stood by the glass looking down at the city lights. I did not shed a single tear for the family I had just lost. In my line of work as a senior financial auditor, you learn to remove emotion from the equation entirely. You look at the raw data, you look at the liabilities. My family was a massive toxic liability, and tonight they had officially severed our contract. I went to bed feeling incredibly lighter than I had in years. But the profound peace I felt did not last very long. The next morning, I woke up exactly at 6 o'clock to the sound of my phone vibrating aggressively against my marble nightstand. It was not a casual text message. It was a high-priority automated fraud alert from my primary banking institution. I sat straight up, grabbed my phone, and quickly opened my secure banking application using biometric authentication. What I saw on the screen made my blood run ice cold. My mother had just initiated a massive wire transfer of exactly $50,000. She drained every single penny out of the joint medical emergency account we shared, leaving the balance at absolute zero. I had opened that specific account 5 years ago when she had a minor health scare. I funded it entirely with my own money to ensure she would never have to worry about exorbitant hospital bills. I explicitly kept her name on it for life-threatening emergencies only. She had never touched it until today. I stared at the zero balance on my screen, processing the betrayal. This was not just a petty theft. This was a highly calculated strike to punish me for saying no to Trey and his fake crypto business venture. She wanted to brutally prove she had absolute power over me. She wanted to hurt me financially because she falsely assumed $50,000 was my entire life savings. To me, it was merely a drop in the bucket, but the sheer audacity of the theft required an immediate and strategic response. I did not panic. I simply walked into my massive custom walk-in closet, pulled on a silk robe, and dialed her personal number. The phone rang 4 long times before she finally answered. I could instantly hear soft, meditative music playing in the background, along with the distinct, soothing sound of running water. She was at a luxury spa. She had just stolen $50,000 from her own daughter and immediately went to a high-end spa to relax. "Good morning, Charmaine," my mother said, her voice dripping with fake exaggerated sweetness. "I am actually a little busy right now getting a hot stone massage. Can this wait until later?" "You transferred $50,000 out of the medical emergency fund at 6 in the morning?" I said, my voice completely deadpan and flat. "I want to know exactly what you think you are doing." My mother let out a sharp, cruel laugh that echoed loudly through the phone speaker. "Oh, please do not act so ridiculously dramatic. I simply took what I am rightfully owed. You embarrassed me in front of my son-in-law. You blatantly disrespected your sister. You acted like you were somehow better than this family. Consider that money back rent for all the years you lived under my roof, eating my food and wearing the clothes I bought you. You should be thanking me for not taking more." I gripped the phone tightly, my knuckles turning white, but I kept my tone perfectly even and controlled. "That money was specifically allocated for medical emergencies. It is not your personal shopping fund, Mother. It is certainly not seed money for whatever financial scam Trey is currently running. Do not you dare speak about Trey that way." She snapped, the fake sweetness instantly dropping to reveal her venom. "Trey is a brilliant visionary. He is going to provide for this family in ways you never could with your boring little spreadsheets and cubicle job. You are just a bitter, selfish girl who cannot stand to see anyone else succeed. I am the mother. I make the rules. What is yours is mine. If you want to play hardball, we will play hardball. Now let me get back to my massage before you ruin my aura." Before I could utter another word, I heard the phone being hastily shuffled around. Someone else aggressively grabbed the receiver. It was Trey. He must have been at the spa with her, probably getting an expensive pedicure on my dime. "Yo, Charmaine," Trey said, his voice thick with unearned arrogance and deep mockery. "Look, I know you are hurting right now. It really sucks being a broke hater. But hey, thanks for the capital investment. My startup is going straight to the moon, and you are going to be stuck auditing tax returns for the rest of your miserable, lonely life. Stay mad." "Trey," I said softly, effectively cutting through his obnoxious, arrogant laughter. "You have absolutely no idea who you are stealing from." "I am not stealing anything," Trey scoffed loudly, dismissing my warning. "Your mom freely gave it to me. It is family business now. Maybe if you were not such a cold, miserable person, you would have a successful man of your own, instead of counting pennies in a lonely apartment. Anyway, we have an exclusive couples facial scheduled in 10 minutes. Enjoy your boring cubicle today." He abruptly hung up. The line went completely dead. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear, staring at the dark screen. They really thought they had won the ultimate victory. They thought they had crippled me financially and finally put me in my proper place. Trey thought he had secured his bag, and my mother thought she had aggressively re-established her dominance over my life. They had absolutely no idea they had just committed a massive federal wire fraud by intentionally moving funds across state lines under completely false pretenses. I walked purposefully into my sleek, modern kitchen, poured myself a fresh cup of dark roast coffee, and opened my personal laptop. I did not cry. I did not scream. I operated with the clinical precision of a top surgeon preparing to cut out a massive toxic tumor. If my mother wanted to talk about playing hardball, I was going to show her exactly what the major leagues looked like. I pulled up the encrypted financial dashboard that securely linked all of the private accounts I managed. I had been quietly paying for her entire lavish lifestyle for several years. The massive mortgage, the luxury car notes, the expensive utilities, the exclusive country club memberships. Every single thing was secretly funneled through corporate holding companies I directly controlled. She ignorantly thought it was her late husband's residual money keeping her afloat. She thought my father had left her a vast fortune. He left her nothing but overwhelming debt. I was the one who stepped in and quietly fixed it because I felt culturally obligated as a daughter. That misplaced obligation instantly evaporated the exact moment she let Trey openly mock me on the phone. I aggressively clicked on the user access controls for her banking profile. I stared at the two primary Black American Express cards she and Chloe used daily. They were supplementary cards tied directly to my personal massive line of credit. They used them for absolutely everything from buying exclusive designer handbags to funding five-star dinners, all while pretending they were independently wealthy socialites. I highlighted the first card on the screen, Chloe's card. I decisively hit the deactivate button. A security prompt quickly appeared asking for a reason. I typed in suspected fraud and permanently confirmed the action. I then highlighted the second card, my mother's card. The exact one she was undoubtedly planning to use to pay for her luxury spa day and whatever lavish designer shopping spree she and Trey had planned immediately afterward. I hit deactivate. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, the dark, bitter taste perfectly matching my current mood. $50,000 was a remarkably cheap price to pay to finally find out exactly who these toxic people truly were. They wanted to blatantly steal my emergency fund. I was going to completely obliterate their entire fake financial existence. I closed my laptop with a satisfying click and went to take a hot shower. Today was going to be a very busy day at the corporate office, and I needed to look absolutely flawless when the real fireworks started. They wanted a war, and I was about to give them a nuclear winter. I stepped out of my shower, wrapping a towel around myself. My phone was sitting on the vanity, lighting up like a frantic distress signal. The screen was a waterfall of alerts. Messages poured in so fast the device vibrated off the edge. I picked it up and unlocked the screen. The first notification was from Instagram. It was a live broadcast alert from my sister Chloe to her 80,000 followers. The sheer volume of direct messages told me this was not her usual makeup tutorial. I tapped the notification and her live feed filled my screen. Chloe was sitting on the plush velvet sofa in the grand living room of the Atlanta estate, the very estate that I secretly owned. She wore an oversized cashmere sweater looking purposefully disheveled. Her blonde hair was pushed back in a messy bun, and she wiped away imaginary tears with a tissue. She looked directly into the camera, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. "I never thought I would have to make a video like this," she whimpered. "But my family is going through a nightmare right now, and I need to speak my truth." I watched in cold silence as the viewer count skyrocketed. "My older sister Charmaine has always struggled with deep jealousy." Chloe continued sniffing loudly. "We always tried to include her. But last night she showed us who she really is. She is a true narcissist. She has this delusional need to appear wealthy, but it is a complete lie. This morning we found out she completely drained my elderly mother's emergency savings account. She stole $50,000 from our mom just to fund her fake rich lifestyle. The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. She was sitting in a house I paid for wearing clothes I financed, accusing me of stealing my own money. My mom is devastated." Chloe sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "Trey and I are going to do everything we can to support her, but it hurts so much when your own blood betrays you. Please send prayers for my mom, guys." The comment section moved so fast it was a blur. Thousands of strangers were sending broken heart emojis and typing out vicious attacks. They called me a thief, a sociopath, and a bitter old woman. Chloe ate up the sympathy basking in the internet outrage. She loved playing the victim, and Trey was probably standing behind the camera directing the production. I closed the application feeling nothing but profound disgust. I did not feel the urge to cry or defend myself to gullible strangers. But the harassment did not stop with Chloe's followers. My actual family members eagerly joined the digital lynch mob. My text messages were a war zone. I opened a message from Auntie Denise, my mother's older sister. Auntie Denise had not worked a steady job in 20 years and constantly asked my mother for loans. Loans secretly funded by my bank account. Charmaine, I am physically sick to my stomach, her text read. How could you do this to your mother? You need to return that money immediately before I call the police. You are no longer welcome at my house for Thanksgiving, I scoffed, tossing the phone. Auntie Denise did not even own her house. She rented a townhouse that I subsidized. Then came the message from cousin Jamal. Jamal was 32, trying to launch a rap career while living in his girlfriend's basement. You are a real sellout, Charmaine, he wrote, using aggressive capital letters. Trey told us you stole Aunt Viv's money out of pure spite. Keep your head on a swivel. You play dirty games, you win dirty prizes. We are pulling up if you do not make this right. The messages kept coming from uncles, cousins, and distant relatives. They blindly took my mother's side because Vivian always controlled the family narrative. She maintained the illusion of being the wealthy matriarch. They had no idea the golden goose they fiercely protected was completely broke, and they were currently threatening the only person keeping the entire family afloat. A weak person would have broken down under the pressure. A desperate person would have gone on Instagram Live to scream their side of the story, posting screenshots of bank statements to prove their innocence. I was neither weak nor desperate. I am a senior financial auditor. I deal in absolute facts. I deal in hard numbers. And I knew that arguing with a fool only proves there are two. Let them have their online pity party. Let them rile up the extended family. I was not going to fight them with angry text messages. I was going to fight them with the most powerful weapon I had in my arsenal: absolute financial control. I walked over to my home office desk and sat down in my leather chair. I opened my personal laptop and brought up my secure private banking portal. I navigated directly to the corporate holding section. I had already identified the two black American Express cards that my mother and sister treated like an infinite money glitch. These cards were authorized user accounts directly attached to my primary corporate credit profile. For the past 4 years, I quietly paid the statement balance in full every single month, never asking for a thank you. I clicked on the recent transaction history for Chloe's card to see exactly what she had been up to before calling me a thief. In the last 48 hours alone, Chloe charged over $4,000. There was a $1,200 charge at a high-end hair salon. There was a massive bill from an exclusive sushi restaurant where she and Trey undoubtedly complained about how cheap I was. They lived a luxurious dream entirely funded by my hard work, while simultaneously trying to destroy my reputation. I then clicked on my mother's transaction history. Her spending was even more reckless. Thousands of dollars at luxury boutiques, expensive spa treatments, and high-end home decor stores. Just yesterday, she swiped the card for a $2,000 customized floral arrangement. She was swiping that card with the absolute confidence of a billionaire while actively plotting my downfall behind my back. It was almost comical how disconnected they were from reality. They had convinced themselves they were entitled to my wealth simply by existing. They completely forgot who actually held the keys to the kingdom. I did not feel a single shred of guilt as I hovered my cursor over the account management settings. I was done being the silent benefactor to people who despised me. I was done funding the lifestyle they were currently using to weaponize against me. I selected Chloe's card first. The system prompted me with a strict security warning asking if I was sure I wanted to freeze the account. I did not hesitate. I clicked confirm. The status indicator instantly changed to a solid suspended red. Next, I selected my mother's card. the exact card she was probably planning to hand to a cashier later that afternoon to buy another ridiculous outfit while playing the grieving victim. I clicked confirm, suspended. Just like that, the financial tap was completely shut off. There would be no more designer shoes. There would be no more luxury spa days. There would be no more expensive dinners funded by the daughter they just publicly humiliated. The absolute beauty of this counterstrike was its complete silence. I did not send them a dramatic text message announcing what I had done. I simply let the digital gears of the banking system do the talking for me. I imagined the exact moment they would find out. They would be standing at a checkout counter surrounded by wealthy peers confidently handing over the heavy metal card, only to watch the cashier awkwardly explain that the transaction was declined. They would try it again. Declined. The embarrassment would be public, immediate, and devastating. They wanted to play a public game of reputation destruction. I was playing a private game of financial annihilation. I closed the banking portal and shut my laptop. I walked back into my bedroom, picked out a charcoal gray suit, and got dressed for work. My phone was still buzzing relentlessly on the nightstand with hateful messages. I picked it up, engaged the Do Not Disturb mode, and dropped it into my handbag. Let them type their angry paragraphs. Let Chloe cry her fake tears for the internet. They were about to learn a harsh lesson about biting the hand that feeds you. The illusion of their wealth was officially over. At exactly 2 o'clock that afternoon, my mother and sister strolled through the gleaming glass doors of Phipps Plaza. Phipps Plaza is the crown jewel of luxury shopping in Atlanta, a place where the truly wealthy and the desperately pretending rub shoulders among polished marble floors and glowing designer storefronts. Vivian and Chloe belonged firmly in the latter category, though you would never know it by simply looking at them. They walked with their noses high in the air, carrying their expensive leather handbags like weapons of mass intimidation. My mother was dressed in a tailored cream pantsuit, her wrists heavily stacked with authentic gold bracelets that I had paid for last Christmas. Chloe trailed right behind her, recording a live video for her followers, complaining loudly about how emotionally exhausted she was from dealing with toxic family drama all morning. They headed straight for one of the most exclusive European designer boutiques in the entire mall. They did not browse the sale racks or look at the clearance items. They demanded the full immediate attention of the sales associates, waving their hands and pointing at the newest arrivals behind the glass cases. My mother selected a $3,000 quilted leather handbag, while Chloe piled up imported silk scarves, oversized sunglasses, and a pair of stiletto heels she had absolutely no business buying. The total came to just over $5,800. They stood at the sleek marble checkout counter, radiating absolute entitlement. The sales associate, a young woman named Sarah, carefully folded the expensive items into crisp white tissue paper and placed them inside massive glossy shopping bags. She smiled politely and tapped the digital payment terminal. My mother did not even bother to look at the girl. She confidently reached into her designer wallet and pulled out the heavy metal Black American Express card, the card with my primary account number securely tethered to it. She tapped it against the reader with a sharp click, fully expecting the familiar approving beep. Instead, the machine let out a loud, harsh buzz. The digital screen flashed red with the word declined in bold letters. Sarah blinked, her polite smile faltering just a fraction. "I am sorry, Mom," she said softly, her voice carrying across the quiet upscale boutique. "It looks like the card was declined. Would you like to try inserting the chip instead?" My mother scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes as if Sarah had just insulted her entire ancestry. "The machine is obviously broken," she snapped violently, snatching the card back. "I spend thousands of dollars here every single month. Run it again and do it properly this time." Sarah nodded quickly, her hands shaking slightly as she manually inserted the heavy metal card into the slot. The machine processed for 3 excruciating seconds before letting out that same loud aggressive buzz. Declined. Call card issuer. The digital prompt was absolutely impossible to misinterpret. A few other wealthy customers in the store stopped browsing and turned their heads to watch the unfolding drama. The silence in the boutique was suddenly deafening. My mother's face flushed a deep crimson red. The embarrassment was hitting her like a physical blow to the chest. "That is completely impossible," she hissed, her voice rising an entire octave. "There is no limit on that card. Let me use my other one." She snatched the card back and turned frantically to my sister. "Chloe, give me your card right now. My bank is clearly having a ridiculous technical issue today." Chloe quickly dug into her designer purse, her face tight with sudden panic. Then she handed over her matching black American Express card. She tapped it nervously against the terminal. Buzz. Declined. Call card issuer. Sarah took a slow step back from the counter, instantly recognizing the escalating volatility of the situation. "I am so sorry, ladies," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Both accounts are showing up as permanently suspended. I cannot complete the transaction today. Do you have another form of payment? Perhaps a debit card or cash? Cash." My mother shrieked the word as if it were a deadly infectious disease. "Do I look like someone who carries $6,000 in dirty cash? You are embarrassing me. You are humiliating me in front of these people. Your entire system is a complete joke, and I want to speak to your regional manager right this second." Chloe started hyperventilating, pulling out her phone to check her banking app. "Mom, what is happening?" she whined loudly, stomping her foot. "Why are our cards not working? People are looking at us. Let us just leave right now." "I am not leaving without my merchandise," my mother yelled, slamming her fist hard on the glass display case. The loud bang echoed sharply through the quiet store. At this point, the boutique manager, a tall, imposing man in a dark tailored suit, quickly walked over from the back office. He stood firmly next to Sarah and looked my mother dead in the eye. "Ma'am, I am going to have to ask you to significantly lower your voice," he said calmly, but with absolute authority. "Your payment methods have been rejected by your financial institution. If you cannot provide a valid alternative method of payment, I must ask you to leave the store immediately before I call mall security to escort you out." My mother opened her mouth to scream another vicious insult, but she caught the reflection of herself in the mirrored pillar next to the register. She looked completely unhinged. She looked exactly like the broke, desperate woman she had spent her entire adult life running away from. She snatched her dead, useless credit cards off the counter, grabbed Chloe tightly by the arm, and stormed out of the boutique, leaving the expensive shopping bag sitting uselessly on the marble counter. They power-walked through the crowded mall fast enough to blur into the background, fleeing the scene of their massive public humiliation. The moment they reached the safety of the VIP parking garage, my mother ripped her cell phone out of her purse. Her hands were shaking so violently, she could barely unlock the digital screen. She found my contact name and hit dial, breathing heavily into the receiver like a cornered animal. I was sitting at my large mahogany desk in my corner office, actively reviewing a quarterly financial report when my personal cell phone rang. I saw her name flashing brightly on the screen. I let it ring 3 full times, just to build the psychological anticipation before I calmly swiped to answer. I did not say hello. I just sat in my comfortable chair and listened to her heavy, frantic breathing. "What did you do, you little monster?" she screamed into the phone, her voice echoing wildly off the concrete walls of the parking garage. "My cards are declined. Chloe's cards are declined. I was just profoundly humiliated in front of half of Buckhead. Turn them back on right now. Turn them back on, or I swear I will make you deeply regret the day you were born." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water, savoring the crisp, cold taste in my mouth. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and looked out the massive glass window at the beautiful Atlanta skyline. "You told me earlier today that I was a parasite mother," I said, my voice completely devoid of any human emotion. "You told me that everything I had belonged entirely to you. You threw me out into the freezing rain and told me I was dead to you. You wanted financial independence from your miserable daughter. Well, congratulations, Vivian. You finally got it." "You cannot do this to me," she shrieked, the sheer panic finally bleeding through her absolute blind rage. "You owe me, Charmaine. I am your mother. You do not just maliciously cut off your own family because you threw a jealous temper tantrum over a simple business loan. Turn those accounts back on right now. I am warning you for the last time. I am not throwing a tantrum, I replied, keeping my tone perfectly even and surgical. I am simply balancing my personal books. You aggressively stole $50,000 from my medical emergency fund this morning to give to a man who actively refuses to work a real job. Consider those suspended credit cards a permanent adjustment to your lavish spending habits. Do not ever call this number demanding my money again. I firmly pressed the end call button and immediately blocked her phone number from my personal device. The silence that filled my spacious office afterward was absolutely beautiful. My mother and sister drove back to the estate in absolute furious, suffocating silence. When they aggressively burst through the massive wooden front doors, Trey was lounging lazily on the living room sofa, eating green grapes and watching sports on my flat-screen television. "What is wrong with you two?" he asked, not even bothering to sit up from his comfortable position. "You look like you just saw a ghost in broad daylight." My mother violently threw her designer handbag across the room, hitting the painted wall with a loud, heavy thud. Charmaine cut us off, she screamed, her voice cracking under the intense emotional pressure. She permanently suspended all the credit lines. We could not buy a single thing. We were completely humiliated at Phipps Plaza. The manager actually threatened to call mall security on us, Trey. Mall security. Trey finally sat up, his arrogant, annoying smirk instantly vanishing from his face. He dropped the cluster of grapes onto the glass coffee table, staring at her in sheer disbelief. "Wait, what do you mean she cut you off?" he asked, his voice suddenly lacing with genuine rising panic. "What about my crypto startup seed money? What about the daily lifestyle maintenance?" My mother paced rapidly back and forth, digging her manicured acrylic nails deep into her palms. "She is punishing us." She seethed, her eyes wide with unhinged fury. "She thinks she holds all the power in this family just because she controls a few plastic cards. She thinks she can disrespect us and walk away without a single scratch." Trey stood up, pacing the length of the expensive Persian rug right alongside her. His deceitful mind was racing, trying desperately to find a fast way to maintain his free, luxurious ride. He absolutely could not afford to lose access to my massive bank account. His leased luxury Maserati payment was due next week, and his fake cryptocurrency startup was nothing but a massive black hole of hidden debt. He stopped dead in his tracks, a dark, malicious grin slowly spreading across his face. "If she wants to play dirty games with our money, then we are going to play dirty games with hers," Trey said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, calculated whisper. "Where exactly does Charmaine work again, Vivian?" My mother stopped pacing and looked at him, completely confused by the sudden change in subject. "She works at that boutique investment firm downtown. She is just some mid-level corporate accountant or standard auditor. Why does that even matter right now?" "It matters because people who handle other people's money have to maintain absolutely spotless ethical records," Trey explained, his eyes gleaming with a highly toxic excitement. "They have incredibly strict federal compliance codes. If she gets reported for severe unethical behavior or financial fraud, she gets fired immediately. If she gets fired, she permanently loses that corporate salary she is so incredibly proud of. She will come crawling right back to us begging for forgiveness when she has absolutely nothing left to her name." My mother smiled, a slow, wicked smile perfectly matching his dark, destructive energy. "You want to hit her career." Trey nodded quickly, pulling his smartphone out of his pocket. "We are going to completely destroy her professional reputation. Let us start digging into this investment firm of hers right now. We are going to find out exactly who her corporate bosses are, and we are going to make a few anonymous phone calls to their compliance hotline. Let us see exactly how arrogant and superior she acts when she is standing outside in the unemployment line." They huddled together on the sofa, plotting my total downfall, completely underestimating the impenetrable financial fortress I had secretly built around myself. Trey and my mother did not waste a single second. They sat in the expansive living room of the estate, frantically typing on their smartphones. Trey was a master of online deception, and it only took him a few minutes to locate the corporate directory for my employer. He found the direct number for the anonymous corporate compliance hotline. This hotline was established specifically to report ethical violations, insider trading, and corporate fraud. Trey dialed the number, placing the phone on speaker so my mother could hear every single word clearly. A serious-sounding operator answered the secure line immediately. Trey deepened his voice, adopting a concerned and highly professional tone. He identified himself as an anonymous family accountant who had recently discovered massive financial discrepancies. He systematically fed the operator a carefully constructed web of absolute lies. He claimed that I was actively embezzling money from my elderly mother's trust fund. He stated that I was committing federal wire fraud to illegally transfer vast sums of corporate money into private offshore accounts. My mother chimed in from the background, pretending to be a weeping victim. She cried out that her own daughter had stolen her entire life savings forever. The compliance operator documented every single fabricated detail with clinical precision. In the highly regulated world of private equity and investment management, anonymous tips are never ignored. The Securities and Exchange Commission mandates that any credible accusation of wire fraud or embezzlement must be investigated immediately and aggressively. Trey provided them with my exact job title, my direct department, and the specific timing of the recent $50,000 transfer. He twisted the truth so masterfully that it sounded like a legitimate federal crime. They hung up the phone feeling completely victorious. They thought they had finally ruined my life. The next morning, I arrived at my office tower exactly at 7:30. I had a massive cup of black coffee in my hand and a solid plan for the upcoming quarterly reviews. I walked onto the executive floor completely unaware of the absolute nightmare waiting for me. I barely had time to turn on my computer monitor before my desk phone rang loudly. It was the executive assistant for the managing director. She told me that my presence was required in the main glass boardroom immediately. She did not say good morning. She sounded incredibly nervous over the phone. I grabbed my digital tablet and walked down the long carpeted hallway toward the boardroom. When I pushed open the heavy glass door, the atmosphere inside was absolutely freezing. Sitting around the massive, polished mahogany table were four older white male executives, including the managing director and the head of corporate compliance. I had spent 10 agonizing years working twice as hard as anyone else to earn a seat at their table. As a black woman in high finance, I knew that any shadow of a doubt could instantly erase a decade of flawless performance. They looked incredibly grim today. "Please sit down, Charmaine," the managing director said, gesturing to a leather chair positioned awkwardly at the far end of the long table. I sat down, crossing my legs, keeping my posture perfectly straight. "We received a highly disturbing anonymous call on the compliance hotline late last night." The head of compliance began sliding a printed transcript across the shiny wood surface. The caller provided highly specific details, alleging that you have been committing wire fraud. They explicitly claimed you are actively embezzling significant funds from a vulnerable family trust and utilizing corporate resources to hide the stolen cash now. I felt a cold, sharp spike of adrenaline hit my chest, but my face remained an unreadable mask. I looked down at the printed transcript, immediately recognizing Trey's specific phrasing and my mother's melodramatic narrative. "This is a completely fabricated malicious attack," I stated calmly, looking directly into the eyes of the managing director. "I have a disgruntled family member who is attempting to retaliate against me for a personal financial dispute. There is absolutely zero corporate money missing. You can audit every single one of my accounts right now, and you will find absolutely nothing out of place today. We know your track record is flawless." Charmaine, the managing director, said, shifting uncomfortably in his expensive chair. "But you know the strict regulations we operate under. The SEC does not allow us to simply ignore formal allegations of federal wire fraud, regardless of how absurd they might seem. We have a legal fiduciary duty to our massive investors. Until the internal audit team can thoroughly investigate these claims and completely clear your name, we have no choice but to take immediate administrative action. You are being placed on an indefinite, unpaid administrative suspension, effective immediately starting right now." The words hung in the sterile air of the boardroom like a death sentence. Suspension. The word alone was a massive toxic stain on any serious financial career. If rumors leaked to other firms that I was suspended for wire fraud, my reputation would be permanently, completely destroyed. I looked around the table at the four men holding my professional life in their hands. I could see the underlying doubt in their eyes. They respected my profits, but they were incredibly eager to distance themselves from any potential legal liability. I had to surrender my access card almost immediately today. I am going to need your corporate laptop, your security badge, and your company cell phone, the head of compliance said, holding out his hand. You will be escorted to your desk to collect your personal belongings. You are not permitted to contact any clients or access any company servers until the investigation is fully resolved. We are very sorry, Charmaine. I did not argue. I did. Arguing makes you look guilty. Showing emotion makes you look unstable. I simply nodded, stood up from the heavy leather chair, and handed over my security badge and my company-issued cell phone right away. I walked out of the boardroom with two silent security guards closely following right behind me. We walked through the busy, open trading floor. Every single person stopped working and stared at me. The whispers started instantly spreading like a wild brush fire across the room. People who had begged for my advice yesterday were now looking at me like I was a dangerous criminal. I kept my chin perfectly level, staring straight ahead. I reached my corner office and grabbed a small cardboard box from the supply closet. I started packing my personal items with absolute clinical precision today. I placed my framed degrees, my favorite pens, and my customized coffee mug into the brown box. My hands were perfectly steady. I refused to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me break down. I had sacrificed my 20s for this company. I had missed countless holidays, birthdays, and social events to build an impenetrable professional reputation. And in less than 24 hours, my own mother and my worthless brother-in-law had managed to orchestrate a devastating attack that ripped it all away. I picked up the box and walked toward the main glass exit doors right now. The elevator ride down to the main lobby felt like an eternity. The security guards stood silently on either side of me, treating me like a complete stranger. When the doors finally chimed open, I stepped out into the bright morning sunlight holding my cardboard box. I walked toward my waiting car, my mind racing with a million different thoughts. They really did it. They actually crossed the ultimate line. Stealing money was one thing, but trying to intentionally destroy my entire career was an act of pure, unforgivable evil. They wanted to make me completely destitute and homeless today. I placed the box in the trunk of my car and sat in the driver's seat. I did not start the engine right away. I just sat there, gripping the leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned stark white. My mother thought she had executed a brilliant, strategic masterstroke. She thought I was just an employee who could be easily fired and left begging for mercy. What she did not know, what none of the men in that boardroom knew, was that I was not just a senior auditor. I was actually a massive shadow partner in the firm today. I owned 60% of the boutique investment firm through a highly classified blind trust. I had essentially just been suspended from my own company because SEC compliance rules apply to absolutely everyone, regardless of secret ownership. The investigation would inevitably prove my total innocence, but the deep personal betrayal was still a massive, gaping wound. My mother had actively tried to ruin my life because I refused to fund a scam. I took a deep breath, letting the cold air fill my lungs. The sadness instantly evaporated, completely replaced by a cold, calculating rage. The war was officially on. I merged onto the highway. I did not drive to a cramped apartment. I drove straight back to my luxury penthouse in Midtown. I dropped the cardboard box onto the marble floor of my foyer. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel an ounce of panic about my temporary suspension. Instead, I felt an absolute ice-cold focus settling over my entire body. I headed straight for my master bedroom. I moved a large abstract painting away from the wall to reveal a high-grade biometric steel safe. I pressed my thumb against the scanner and typed in the 12-digit passcode. The heavy metal door clicked open with a satisfying, solid sound. Inside were stacks of encrypted hard drives, emergency cash reserves, and several thick leather-bound legal folders. I reached in and pulled out the heaviest folder, placing it gently on my custom oak desk. I opened the heavy cover and stared deeply at the official corporate seals stamped across the thick parchment paper. My family, along with those four nervous executives in the boardroom, genuinely believed I was just a highly paid employee. They thought I climbed the corporate ladder through sheer grit. They were only half right. I did put in the grueling hours, but I did not just climb the ladder. I bought the entire building. The documents laid out in front of me proved that I was the majority shareholder of the very boutique investment firm that had just suspended me. Through a blind trust, I secretly owned 60% of the corporate entity. I had structured the Delaware-based holding company this way for my own absolute legal and personal protection. In the high-stakes cutthroat world of private equity, keeping your massive wealth completely anonymous shields you from relentless financial predators. More importantly, it shielded me from my own mother and sister. If Vivian had ever found out I owned the firm, she would have demanded an executive title, an exorbitant salary for doing absolutely nothing, and unrestricted access to the corporate expense accounts. The suspension was nothing more than a temporary bureaucratic technicality. Because my ownership was legally held in a blind trust, the compliance department had to follow standard procedures. They were simply doing their jobs protecting the firm from massive federal liability. Once the internal audit concluded that the anonymous tip was a complete fabrication, I would be fully reinstated with a pristine record. But I was not going to sit around and passively wait for the corporate lawyers to clear my name. My mother and Trey had actively chosen to weaponize my career against me. It was time for me to systematically dismantle their entire pathetic existence. I picked up my personal cell phone, the one not monitored by my company, and dialed a highly secure private number. I did not hire some cheap local amateur detective. I called Julian. Julian was a former federal forensic accountant turned elite private investigator. He specialized in tracking hidden assets, dismantling offshore shell companies, and exposing high-level corporate fraud. If a person tried to hide a single dollar, Julian could easily find it in the dark. He answered on the second ring. "Good afternoon, Charmaine," Julian said. "To what do I owe the pleasure today?" "I need a complete financial and personal background excavation on my brother-in-law," I said, getting straight to the point without any hesitation. "His name is Trey. He claims to be running a revolutionary artificial intelligence crypto trading startup right here in Atlanta. I want to know every dollar he spends and every lie he tells. I want his bank statements, tax returns, lease agreements, and credit history. I want to know what he ate for breakfast last Tuesday. Leave absolutely no stone unturned, Julian." "Consider it done," Julian replied, typing rapidly on a mechanical keyboard in the background. Crypto startups run by flashy guys in Atlanta are usually a massive goldmine of terrible financial decisions. I will have a comprehensive encrypted file sent directly to your private server within 48 hours. "Make it 24, I countered. Money is absolutely no object. I need enough heavy ammunition to completely obliterate his life. I love it when you play hardball, Charmaine. I will send the file tomorrow." I hung up the phone and walked into my pristine kitchen to pour a large glass of expensive red wine. For the next 24 hours, I completely disconnected from the noise and the chaos. My mother tried calling from blocked numbers, but my security settings rejected every attempt. Chloe posted 2 more dramatic videos on social media, crying to her followers about how her sister was an evil corporate criminal who was currently under severe federal investigation. Trey had clearly bragged to them about his cowardly anonymous phone call to my compliance department. They were eagerly celebrating my supposed downfall, drinking cheap champagne in a house that I legally owned. I let them celebrate their fake victory. The higher they climbed on their fragile pedestal of lies, the harder the concrete was going to feel when I finally pulled the rug out from under them. Exactly 24 hours later, my email chimed loudly. Julian sent a massive attached PDF file labeled with Trey's legal name. I opened the file on my large desktop monitor and began reading through the meticulous documentation. I expected to find some standard credit card debt or a few unpaid parking tickets. Julian uncovered a profound financial disaster. Trey did not own a tech startup. There was absolutely no artificial intelligence algorithm. There were no eager venture capitalists lining up to hand him millions of dollars. The entire operation was a textbook Ponzi scheme built on an incredibly flimsy foundation of deceit. He had successfully convinced several amateur retail investors, including a few elderly members of his own extended family, to give him hard cash under the false promise of massive guaranteed cryptocurrency returns. He used new deposits to pay off older investors, creating the illusion of profit. It was federal wire fraud, the exact felony he accused me of committing. The absolute hypocrisy was staggering, but Julian did not stop at the business fraud. He dug deep into Trey's personal lifestyle. The bright blue Maserati that Trey aggressively drove around Atlanta, constantly bragging about his immense success, was not owned. It was not even legally leased under his own name. He was renting the vehicle through a highly shady third-party exotic car-sharing application, and he was currently 3 weeks behind on the weekly payments. The luxury apartment he claimed to own before conveniently moving into the estate with Chloe had actually been formally foreclosed on 2 years ago. Trey was completely broke. He was a financial ghost, haunting my family, attempting to siphon off the immense wealth he incorrectly assumed we possessed. Then I scrolled down to page 14 of the extensive report, and my jaw physically dropped open. Julian had attached a scanned copy of a recent pawnshop receipt located in a very dangerous neighborhood on the far south side of the city. 2 months ago, Trey had casually walked into that pawnshop and handed over a highly expensive piece of jewelry for a quick cash loan of $8,000. I zoomed in on the high-resolution photograph attached to the electronic ticket. It was Chloe's actual wedding ring. The massive custom-designed platinum diamond ring she constantly flashed on her social media videos to eagerly prove exactly how much her husband loved her. Trey had secretly stolen his own wife's authentic diamond ring, pawned it to quickly cover his mounting Ponzi scheme debts, and silently replaced the center stone with a cheap, worthless cubic zirconia. Chloe had been walking around for 2 entire months, aggressively bragging about a piece of completely fake glass resting comfortably on her finger. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glowing screen in pure, absolute shock. I knew Trey was a highly toxic, manipulative grifter, but I genuinely did not expect him to be this blatantly ruthless to his own wife. He was actively destroying Chloe behind her back, while she eagerly joined him in trying to destroy my professional career. They were a match made in absolute hell. I printed the entire 50-page dossier, carefully placing the warm pages into a pristine black leather binder. This was no longer just about vigorously defending my corporate reputation. This was about completely eradicating a severe toxic infection from my life. I had the undeniable proof of his fraud. I had the pawn shop ticket. I had the lease agreements. I held the nuclear launch keys right in the palm of my hand. My mother and Trey thought they were playing a highly sophisticated game of chess. They had absolutely no idea I owned the entire board. For the next 3 full days, I maintained absolute radio silence. I did not log onto social media to defend myself against the relentless barrage of insults. I did not respond to the threatening voicemails my mother left on my blocked number, which were automatically routed to a hidden folder. To Vivian and Trey, my silence looked exactly like defeat. They genuinely believed that getting me suspended from my corporate job was the ultimate fatal blow. They pictured me sitting alone in a cramped apartment, crying over my ruined career and panicking about how I was going to pay my bills. That profound delusion fueled their towering arrogance. They felt completely invincible. Emboldened by their perceived victory, they decided to go in for the final kill. If they could not legally access my suspended credit cards, they were going to try to force a massive cash payout through the court system. They wanted to bleed me entirely dry. To execute this ridiculous plan, they needed legal representation. No reputable corporate attorney in the greater Atlanta area would ever touch a case this incredibly flimsy. So Trey tapped into his shady network of fellow hustlers and found a lawyer who operated out of a dilapidated strip mall in Decatur. His name was Reginald. Reginald was a loudmouth personal injury attorney known primarily for running incredibly cheap television commercials at 2 in the morning. He was exactly the kind of bottom-feeding lawyer who would gladly file a frivolous lawsuit if it meant securing a few minutes of media attention. My mother and Trey sat in his cramped office spinning a highly dramatized tale of elder abuse and financial manipulation. They painted themselves as the innocent victims of a greedy, ruthless corporate accountant. Reginald did not bother to verify a single one of their absurd claims. He saw a wealthy target and saw dollar signs. Within 48 hours, Reginald officially filed a civil lawsuit against me in the Fulton County Superior Court. I was sitting at my kitchen island, reviewing the extensive forensic audit Julian had compiled, when a loud, aggressive knock echoed through my penthouse. I walked over to the front door and looked through the security camera. A scruffy man in a cheap windbreaker was standing in the hallway holding a thick manila envelope. I opened the door and he practically shoved the envelope into my chest. "You have been formally served," he mumbled quickly, before turning around and rushing back toward the elevator. I closed the door, walked back to the kitchen, and tore open the heavy envelope. I pulled out the stack of legal documents and began reading the formal complaint. I honestly expected a simple demand letter or a desperate plea for financial reinstatement. What I read was so remarkably absurd that I actually laughed out loud in my empty apartment. The lawsuit was a masterpiece of pure, unadulterated fiction. Reginald had drafted a 50-page complaint accusing me of utilizing extreme undue influence to maliciously manipulate my late grandmother 5 years ago. According to their fabricated timeline, I had systematically isolated my grandmother in her final months, coercing her into altering her final will and testament. They claimed I illegally forced her to cut my mother Vivian completely out of the inheritance so I could hoard the vast family fortune entirely for myself. Because of this alleged psychological manipulation, my mother was now suing me for a staggering $2 million in severe emotional distress and punitive damages. But the absolute best part of the lawsuit, the part that truly showcased their breathtaking ignorance, was the final legal demand. Vivian officially requested that the judge grant a permanent legal restraining order, barring me from ever stepping foot on what she referred to as the Vivian family estate. She wanted the court to legally block me from entering the exact house that I had secretly purchased in cash 4 years ago. The house that I was currently allowing her to live in completely rent-free. The sheer audacity of the legal filing was truly something to behold. They accused me of utilizing sophisticated financial trickery to blind an elderly woman who was sharp as a tack until her dying breath. My grandmother was the only person in the family who truly saw my mother for the reckless spender she was. That was exactly why she left the trust fund under my exclusive management. But Reginald, the strip mall lawyer, did not care about the actual truth. He packed the lawsuit with highly sensationalized legal jargon, hoping to intimidate me into a rapid out-of-court settlement. The document detailed how my mother had suffered from severe anxiety, chronic insomnia, and profound emotional trauma due to my supposed betrayal. It claimed that her sudden inability to access her credit cards was a direct continuation of my malicious financial abuse. They were actively trying to weaponize the legal system to force me to turn the money tap back on. I carefully placed the lawsuit down on the cool marble countertop. They genuinely thought this thick stack of paper would terrify me. They thought I would immediately call them begging for a quiet resolution to protect my already damaged professional reputation. They severely miscalculated my psychological endurance. When you work in high-level private equity, you deal with massive hostile takeovers and aggressive corporate litigation on a daily basis. A poorly drafted civil complaint from a desperate grifter and a television lawyer was not a threat. It was a formal written invitation to completely destroy them in a public arena. By filing this ridiculous lawsuit, they had legally opened the door for the discovery process. They just handed me the legal right to completely expose their entire fraudulent existence on the public record without any confidentiality restrictions. But Trey was not satisfied with simply fighting a battle in the courtroom. He was deeply addicted to public attention, and he wanted to inflict maximum collateral damage. He knew that the corporate world despised public scandals. He figured that if he made the lawsuit a massive public spectacle, my investment firm would be forced to permanently terminate my employment just to avoid the negative press. Later that same evening, my phone chimed with a breaking news alert. Trey had anonymously leaked the entire 50-page civil lawsuit to a highly popular Atlanta gossip blog. This specific blog was notorious for destroying local reputations and thriving on toxic rumors. The headline blared across the top of my screen in massive, bold letters. Prominent Atlanta auditor accused of stealing millions from elderly grandmother in shocking family betrayal. The blog post was a complete character assassination. It featured a terribly unflattering photograph of me taken from an old corporate directory, intentionally placed right next to a glamorous, glowing picture of Vivian and Chloe. The article painted my mother as a heartbroken high society matriarch who had been ruthlessly victimized by her own greedy offspring. It quoted heavily from the lawsuit, emphasizing the $2 million emotional distress claim. Trey had even provided the blog with anonymous quotes, supposedly from a close family friend. The quotes called me a calculating sociopath who cared more about corporate profits than my own flesh and blood. The post went viral almost instantly. Thousands of people who had absolutely no idea who I was were suddenly heavily invested in my personal destruction. The comment section devolved into a chaotic, toxic wasteland of pure hatred. People were actively calling for my immediate arrest and public humiliation. My sister Chloe capitalized on the sudden viral momentum. She took to her own social media platforms, posting a highly dramatic screenshot of the gossip blog article. She added a caption featuring the praying hands emoji and a long paragraph about how justice would eventually be served. Our extended family members proudly shared the article on their own pages, praising Vivian for her stunning bravery in standing up to my supposed abuse. They were throwing a massive digital party celebrating my complete public execution. I sat alone in my quiet penthouse watching the absolute chaos unfold on my computer screen. A lesser person would have completely unraveled. The relentless public shaming, the vicious lies, and the aggressive legal threats were designed to completely break my spirit. But they forgot one crucial detail about my personality. I do not break. I adapt and I conquer. Every single share, every single toxic comment, and every single lie they published was simply adding more weight to the heavy anvil that was about to drop directly onto their heads. They wanted a massive public spectacle, and they wanted a loud audience. I decided right then and there to quickly give them the most profoundly devastating audience imaginable. The next morning, I woke up with absolute crystal clear purpose. The internet was completely ablaze with my fabricated scandal, but I did not let it dictate my routine. I walked into my custom closet and selected my armor for the day. I chose an emerald green suit, a crisp white silk blouse, and my designer heels. I grabbed my leather briefcase and headed out. I decided to work remotely from my favorite high-end coffee shop in Buckhead. It was my territory. I drove my Maybach through the morning traffic, feeling unbothered by the toxic digital circus my family had created. I handed my keys to the valet and walked inside. I ordered my black coffee and took a seat at a marble table near the front patio facing the bustling street. I opened my laptop and began reviewing the documents Julian sent me. I had been sitting there for exactly 20 minutes when the peaceful morning atmosphere was violently shattered. I heard my sister's shrill voice before I even saw her. I looked up and saw Chloe and my mother marching aggressively up the sidewalk directly toward the coffee shop patio. Chloe was holding her smartphone high in the air, actively recording a live video for her audience of gullible followers. My mother Vivian was walking right beside her, looking like a woman possessed by malicious victory. She was wearing a designer trench coat and gripping a thick stack of legal documents in her manicured hand. They had clearly tracked my location. They wanted a massive public confrontation to feed the viral gossip blog narrative. They wanted to humiliate me in broad daylight, in front of the wealthy demographic I associated with. Several patrons on the patio turned their heads to watch the unfolding spectacle. My mother stopped right in front of my small marble table. She looked down at me, her face twisted into a vicious, triumphant sneer. "Well, look who it is," she announced loudly. The wealthy corporate executive reduced to working out of a public coffee shop because she got fired for stealing. I did not close my laptop. I did not stand up. I slowly picked up my porcelain coffee cup and took a calm, measured sip, looking at her over the rim. "You are blocking my sunlight, Mother," I said, my voice perfectly even and completely devoid of any emotion. Chloe shoved her phone camera practically into my face. "Say hello to the internet," Charmaine Chloe taunted, her voice dripping with fake moral superiority. Everyone wants to see the face of the sociopath who stole from her own elderly grandmother. How does it feel knowing the entire world finally sees exactly who you are? I slowly placed my coffee cup back onto the matching saucer. It feels incredibly peaceful, Chloe, I replied, staring directly into the camera lens. You should enjoy this minor burst of internet fame while you still have a phone plan to support it. My mother let out a loud, dramatic scoff. She raised the thick stack of legal documents high into the air, ensuring everyone on the patio could clearly see them. You think you can freeze my credit cards and kick me out without facing severe consequences? I am taking you for everything you have. I hired a brilliant lawyer, and we are going to completely expose your financial abuse. We are going to drain every single penny out of your accounts to compensate for the emotional trauma you inflicted on this family. She took a step closer, her eyes blazing with absolute toxic rage. With a sudden violent motion, she pulled her arm back and threw the thick legal summons directly at my chest. The heavy stack of papers hit me hard against my silk blouse, breaking the secure binding. Dozens of white legal pages scattered wildly into the air and rained down all over my table, my laptop, and the pristine concrete floor of the patio. A collective gasp echoed from the surrounding tables. People were openly staring now, some even pulling out their phones to record the chaotic scene. My mother stood there breathing heavily, looking incredibly pleased with her dramatic performance. You are completely finished, Charmaine, she gloated, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. Your corporate career is permanently over. Your reputation is completely destroyed. When my lawyer is done with you in court, I am taking everything you own, and you are going to be sleeping under a dirty bridge. The silence that followed her aggressive threat was heavy and absolute. The entire patio waited with bated breath, expecting me to scream, to cry, or to physically retaliate. They expected a massive, chaotic fight. I refused to give them one. I calmly brushed a stray piece of legal paper off my emerald green blazer. I slowly closed my laptop and placed it neatly into my leather briefcase. I stood up from my chair, smoothing out the wrinkles in my suit trousers. I stood at my full height, looking down at the scattered mess of fabricated legal threats covering the concrete ground. I did not scramble to pick them up. I did not look embarrassed or panicked. I stepped forward, bringing the sharp heel of my expensive designer shoe directly down onto the cover page of her ridiculous lawsuit. I looked my mother dead in the eye. I stripped away every single ounce of daughterly affection, leaving nothing but the cold, calculating stare of a woman who held absolute, total power. Bring a box to court, I said, my voice low, sharp, and cutting through the morning air like a newly sharpened blade. You are going to need it to pack your things. My mother visibly recoiled from the pure, icy confidence radiating from my statement. Her triumphant sneer faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a brief flash of genuine uncertainty. She expected me to cower in fear or loudly beg for mercy. She did not expect a calm, collected promise of total destruction. Chloe quickly lowered her smartphone, the digital recording completely failing to capture the dramatic, emotional breakdown they had meticulously planned. What is that supposed to mean? Vivian stammered, attempting to regain her loud, authoritative posture. You have absolutely nothing left to fight with. You are completely bluffing. I did not bother to explain myself to a woman who possessed the strategic foresight of a toddler. I simply maintained my intense, unblinking eye contact, forcing her to look away first. I picked up my briefcase and gracefully stepped over the remaining scattered legal documents, leaving the mess entirely on the patio floor. I walked past the bewildered crowd of wealthy patrons, holding my head high completely, ignoring the frantic whispers spreading through the outdoor seating area. I walked straight to the valet stand, handed the attendant a $50 bill, and slid into the luxurious driver's seat of my Maybach. As I pulled out into the bustling Buckhead traffic, I glanced at my rearview mirror. Vivian and Chloe were still standing awkwardly by the marble table, looking completely foolish. The highly public confrontation was exactly the catalyst I needed to set the final stage. They had officially served me with their ridiculous civil lawsuit, meaning a formal court date would be aggressively scheduled within the next few days. It was time to deploy the heavy corporate artillery. I connected my phone to the car audio system and dialed the direct private line of the most lethal corporate litigation attorney in the state of Georgia. He answered the phone with his usual sharp professional tone. "Good morning," Charmaine Harrison said. "Defamation is only the beginning, Harrison," I replied, merging onto the highway. "I was just physically served with a civil complaint. My mother is officially suing me for $2 million in emotional distress and requesting a permanent restraining order to keep me away from the family estate. I need you to represent me in court. I do not just want to win the lawsuit, Harrison," I stated firmly, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. "I want a total, absolute slaughter. I want you to officially subpoena the detailed forensic financial audit I just had a private investigator complete on Trey. I want you to bring the authentic property deeds, the corporate ownership documents, and the original unedited trust fund ledger. We are not going to quietly settle this behind closed doors. We are going to let them walk into that courtroom completely blind, and we are going to systematically dismantle their entire lives on the public record." "Understood," Charmaine Harrison replied, his voice turning deadly serious. "I will fast-track the court date. We file an expedited motion for discovery and demand an immediate preliminary hearing. They have absolutely no idea what kind of legal hurricane they just invited into their lives. I will have my paralegal draft the initial response, and we will corner them before they even realize the trap has been set." The morning of the preliminary hearing arrived with clouds hanging low over the Atlanta skyline. I did not feel nervous. I felt a profound sense of clarity. I spent the early morning hours reviewing the legal strategy with Harrison and his team of corporate litigators. We knew exactly how this day was going to unfold. I dressed for the occasion. I chose a tailored slate gray designer suit that projected power and authority. I paired it with minimal silver jewelry and pulled my hair back into a flawless bun. I was not walking into that courthouse to defend myself against their lies. I was walking in to perform a calculated professional execution. My driver pulled the Maybach right up to the front steps of the Fulton County Superior Court. I stepped out of the vehicle and the crisp morning air hit my face. Harrison was already waiting for me by the stone pillars, accompanied by his senior partner, a sharp woman named Eleanor, who specialized in destroying fraudulent financial claims. We did not speak much as we walked through the security metal detectors. There was no need for small talk. We were a synchronized unit moving with lethal purpose. The marble hallways of the courthouse echoed with the sounds of desperate people fighting over broken promises and stolen money. We ignored the noise and walked straight toward courtroom 4. Harrison pushed open the heavy wooden double doors and we stepped inside the room. The air conditioning was running high, making the space feel sterile and unforgiving. I kept my chin level and my expression blank as I scanned the room. This was the moment my toxic family had begged for. My mother Vivian, my sister Chloe, and her husband Trey were already seated at the plaintiff's table. They looked smug. Vivian was wearing a bright crimson dress that was entirely inappropriate for a legal proceeding. She had a fake pearl necklace draped around her neck, playing the role of the wealthy matriarch. Chloe was sitting right next to her, chewing a piece of gum and tapping her expensive designer nails against the polished wood table. Trey was leaning back in his chair wearing a cheap gray suit that fit him poorly. He had a highly obnoxious, arrogant smirk plastered across his face. When they saw me walk through the double doors with two of the most expensive and terrifying corporate litigators in the state, their smug smiles grew even wider. They genuinely believed I had hired expensive lawyers out of pure panic. They thought my formal tailored suit and my stoic demeanor were just a facade to hide my terror. Their discount television lawyer, Reginald, was busy shuffling through a massive, messy pile of disorganized papers. He looked exactly like a man who was out of his depth, but far too arrogant to realize it. Harrison, Eleanor, and I calmly took our seats at the defense table. I placed my black leather briefcase on the table right in front of me. I did not look over at my toxic family. I did not give them an ounce of satisfaction. I simply stared straight ahead at the wooden bench, waiting for the presiding judge to make her entrance. The heavy side door finally opened and the court bailiff loudly announced the arrival of Judge Sterling to the courtroom. Judge Sterling walked into the courtroom with a commanding presence. She was an older African American woman with sharp, piercing eyes and a solid reputation for being completely ruthless against frivolous lawsuits. She took her seat at the high wooden bench, adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses, and opened the heavy case file. She looked down at Reginald with a highly skeptical expression. She firmly instructed him to begin his preliminary opening statement. Reginald eagerly stood up, buttoned his cheap suit jacket, and walked confidently toward the center of the courtroom. He cleared his throat loudly, preparing to deliver the dramatic performance of his incredibly mediocre legal career. Your Honor. Reginald began, his voice booming, unnecessarily loud. We are here today to expose a deeply disturbing case of financial elder abuse and severe emotional manipulation. Sitting right over there is my client's daughter, Charmaine. To the outside world, she presents herself as a successful, highly educated financial professional. But behind closed doors, she is a calculating predator who systematically abused the absolute trust of her own loving family. My mother, Vivian, immediately pulled a white lace handkerchief out of her red purse and dabbed at her perfectly dry eyes. Chloe reached over and gently rubbed her mother's shoulder, playing the role of the highly supportive and completely devastated daughter. Reginald dramatically pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. He loudly claimed that I had utilized my corporate financial expertise to maliciously isolate my late grandmother during her final highly vulnerable years. He completely fabricated a ridiculous story about how I secretly forced my grandmother to alter her final will and testament, deliberately cutting my innocent mother out of her rightful family inheritance. He spun a wild, entirely fictional narrative about how I was aggressively hoarding millions of dollars out of pure toxic spite. Reginald continued his long-winded, completely unhinged speech for another 20 full minutes. He formally requested that the court grant a massive $2 million financial judgment for my mother's severe emotional distress. He then loudly demanded the immediate approval of a permanent restraining order to legally ban me from ever stepping foot on the Vivian family estate. Throughout this entire ridiculous theatrical performance, Harrison and Eleanor sat absolutely perfectly still. Any normal defense attorney would have immediately jumped up and loudly objected to the endless stream of hearsay and baseless aggressive slander. They would have aggressively interrupted Reginald to point out his total lack of concrete factual evidence. But Harrison did not move a single muscle. He simply sat there with his hands neatly folded, resting entirely comfortably on the heavy wooden table. We had extensively discussed this specific tactical maneuver earlier that morning. We explicitly wanted Reginald to talk as much as legally possible. We wanted him to build a massive, towering house of cards, right there in the middle of the quiet courtroom. We wanted my mother and Trey to feel a deep, overwhelming sense of absolute impending victory. Letting them dig their own massive legal grave was an incredibly crucial part of our overall psychological warfare. I glanced slowly over at the plaintiff's table. Trey was grinning from ear to ear, leaning forward in his chair like he had already won the massive multi-million-dollar lottery. My mother was nodding along with every single dramatic lie Reginald spewed into the quiet room. She looked directly over at me with a deeply vicious and incredibly arrogant smile. She genuinely thought my absolute silence was an explicit admission of overwhelming guilt. She thought my expensive corporate lawyers were completely paralyzed by the sheer brilliant magnitude of Reginald's opening legal statement. She had absolutely no idea that true absolute power never needs to loudly shout. When Reginald finally concluded his long, dramatic opening statement, he wiped a heavy bead of sweat from his forehead. He practically strutted back to the plaintiff's table, looking incredibly proud of his loud performance. He sat down heavily next to my mother and shot a highly confident smirk directly at Harrison. Judge Sterling did not look impressed at all. She slowly folded her hands together and leaned forward, looking directly down at the plaintiff's table. Her expression was completely devoid of any warmth or sympathy. That was certainly a very passionate narrative, Counselor, Judge Sterling said, her voice echoing firmly through the silent courtroom. However, passion does not legally substitute for documented facts in my courtroom. You are making incredibly severe allegations of elder abuse, federal wire fraud, and massive financial manipulation. You are also aggressively requesting a permanent restraining order to restrict the defendant from accessing a very specific multi-million-dollar residential property. Reginald quickly stood up, nodding his head enthusiastically. Yes, Your Honor, he replied loudly. My client Vivian has suffered profound emotional devastation, and she desperately needs the immediate legal protection of this honorable court to safely remain in her beloved family home. Judge Sterling sighed softly, adjusting her dark wire-rimmed glasses once again. Very well, Counselor, she stated firmly, her tone dropping an octave. Before we proceed any further with these massive financial claims, or even discuss the possibility of a permanent restraining order, I need to formally verify the legal foundation of your central argument. I need to see the official registered property deeds for this estate you keep mentioning. Hand over the certified residential ownership documents establishing that your client, Vivian, actually possesses the legal right to restrict access to the specified property. Reginald enthusiastically grabbed a thin paper folder and proudly walked it up to the bench, entirely unaware that he was happily handing over the absolute instrument of their own complete total destruction. Reginald eagerly placed the thin paper folder directly onto the elevated wooden bench. He flashed a wide, confident grin at Judge Sterling, as if he had just delivered the ultimate winning lottery ticket. He took a few dramatic steps backward, returning to the plaintiff's table with a highly exaggerated swagger. My mother, Vivian, actually reached out and patted Reginald on his cheap suit jacket, looking incredibly pleased with his performance. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms over her crimson dress, radiating an aura of absolute invincibility. She looked over at me with a deeply condescending sneer. Judge Sterling did not look at Reginald. She did not look at my mother. She carefully opened the thin manila folder and pulled out the single sheet of paper Reginald had provided as his definitive proof of ownership. The courtroom descended into an incredibly heavy, suffocating silence. The only sound was the soft rustling of the paper as the judge adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses and scanned the document. I watched Judge Sterling's eyes move rapidly across the page. Her brow furrowed into a deep, highly skeptical frown. She flipped the page over, looking for a secondary document or an official county seal. There was absolutely nothing else in the folder. Judge Sterling slowly lowered the piece of paper and looked directly at Reginald. Her expression was completely unreadable, but the sharp tone of her voice cut through the silent room like a crack of a whip. Counselor, what exactly is this document you just handed to me? She asked, holding the flimsy piece of paper up by its corner. Reginald quickly stood up, puffing out his chest. That is the official residential deed, Your Honor, Reginald proclaimed proudly. It clearly establishes that my client Vivian is the sole legal owner of the massive family estate in question. Therefore, she possesses the absolute legal authority to demand a permanent restraining order to protect her private property from the defendant. Judge Sterling let out a long, heavy sigh that echoed clearly through the court microphone. This is an outdated utility bill from 4 years ago, Counselor, she stated, her voice dripping with profound judicial annoyance. A utility bill is absolutely not a registered property deed. It does not legally prove ownership of anything other than a past due electricity balance. Reginald faltered, his arrogant smile instantly dropping from his face. He scrambled through the messy pile of disorganized papers on his table, frantically searching for the actual property deed he had clearly forgotten to secure before filing this massive lawsuit. Your Honor, we must have accidentally left the primary certified copy at my office, he stammered nervously, wiping a fresh bead of sweat from his forehead. But the ownership of the estate is an undisputed established fact. My client has lived there comfortably for over 30 years. She is the undisputed matriarch of the family. Vivian felt the sudden shift in the courtroom atmosphere and decided to take matters into her own hands. She stood up from her chair, completely ignoring courtroom protocol. Her voice rang out loud and incredibly bitter. I do not need a piece of paper to prove that house belongs to me, Vivian declared, pointing an angry manicured finger directly at me. I raised that ungrateful girl in that beautiful home. I provided everything for her. She lived completely rent-free under my luxurious roof for years. Without me, she would be homeless right now. Those were the exact words I had been waiting for. The ultimate display of her blinding, toxic arrogance. I did not react, but sitting right next to me, Harrison slowly stood up from the defense table. He buttoned his expensive tailored suit jacket and calmly picked up a thick, heavy leather binder. He walked purposefully toward the center of the courtroom, instantly commanding the complete attention of every single person in the room. Judge Sterling looked down at him, acknowledging his presence with a subtle nod. Your Honor. Harrison began, his voice incredibly smooth and dripping with absolute legal authority. The defense completely agrees that documentation of property ownership is absolutely central to this ridiculous lawsuit. The plaintiff has just confidently stated on the official public record that without her, my client Charmaine would be completely homeless. The plaintiff has formally requested a permanent restraining order to ban my client from accessing this specific estate. However, the plaintiff has blatantly failed to provide the court with an actual certified property deed. Fortunately, the defense has come fully prepared to rectify this glaring administrative error. Harrison confidently approached the bench and handed the heavy leather binder directly to the court bailiff. The bailiff meticulously transferred the binder to Judge Sterling. I have just submitted to the court the official certified property deeds, the comprehensive county tax records, and the complete corporate ownership registry for the estate in question, Harrison stated, turning slightly so he could look directly at Vivian. My mother crossed her arms tighter, her condescending sneer returning. She genuinely thought Harrison was just wasting time. She thought the legal documents would simply confirm what she already believed to be the absolute truth. Judge Sterling opened the heavy leather binder. She carefully read through the first official document. Then she read the second. A profound, heavy realization washed over the judge's face. She looked up from the official documents and stared directly at my mother. The sheer intensity of the judge's gaze made Vivian's arrogant sneer slightly falter. You are requesting a permanent restraining order to protect your private estate, Judge Sterling asked, her voice completely devoid of any emotion. Yes, Your Honor. Vivian replied, her voice suddenly sounding much smaller in the massive room. Because it is my house. Judge Sterling slowly shook her head, placing the heavy legal documents flat on the wooden bench. She adjusted her glasses and looked right through my mother. So they really do not know, Judge Sterling asked, looking directly over at me and Harrison. Reginald frowned in deep confusion, stepping forward. Know what, Your Honor? He asked, his voice trembling slightly. Judge Sterling sighed, tapping her pen against the thick stack of papers. Actually, she is the one who owns your home, the judge stated plainly, dropping the absolute ultimate bomb into the dead silent courtroom. You are just a tenant. The words hung in the sterile air, suspended like shattering glass. Vivian completely froze. Her entire body locked up and the vibrant color instantly drained from her face. She turned as white as a ghost, her jaw dropping slightly open. She looked exactly like a woman who had just been violently struck by lightning. Chloe abruptly stopped chewing her gum, her eyes widening in absolute sheer terror. Trey sat perfectly still, his obnoxious smirk completely wiped from his face, as the devastating reality of the situation rapidly crashed down upon him. That is completely impossible, Vivian whispered, her voice shaking uncontrollably. My husband left me that estate. It has been in our family name for decades. She is lying. That is a completely forged, fraudulent document. Harrison did not even raise his voice when he delivered the final, devastating blow. It is absolutely not a forgery, he stated calmly, picking up a secondary copy of the file from our table. According to the official Fulton County financial records, the estate in question was formally foreclosed upon exactly 4 years ago. The massive foreclosure was entirely due to extreme overwhelming credit card debt and multiple unpaid secondary mortgages taken out exclusively by Vivian. The bank was just 72 hours away from physically evicting her from the premises and auctioning the property to the highest commercial bidder. Vivian's hands began to shake violently. She grabbed the edge of the plaintiff's table to physically support her failing legs. The entire facade of her wealthy high society lifestyle was rapidly crumbling to dust on the public judicial record. She had spent the last 4 years actively hiding the massive, humiliating foreclosure from the entire family. She had desperately pretended that she was still a powerful, wealthy matriarch when in absolute reality, she was completely broke and drowning in severe, insurmountable debt. However, the property was never sold at a public bank auction. Harrison continued reading directly from the certified legal documents. The entire estate was privately purchased in a massive all-cash transaction by an anonymous corporate entity known as Apex Holdings, LLC. This private holding company completely paid off all the outstanding fraudulent debts, clearing the massive liens, and taking absolute total ownership of the residential property. Reginald was practically sweating through his cheap suit. He frantically flipped through his own messy notes, trying desperately to find a legal loophole that simply did not exist. "Your Honor," Reginald stammered loudly, "what does an anonymous corporate LLC have to do with this specific family lawsuit? If an anonymous company owns the house, then my client is still the primary legal resident." Harrison slowly turned and looked directly at Reginald with a gaze so incredibly sharp it could cut through solid steel. "Because Counselor Harrison," replied, his voice echoing powerfully through the room, "Apex Holdings LLC is not an anonymous corporate entity anymore. As clearly outlined in Exhibit B of the submitted documentation, the absolute sole proprietor, the primary financial shareholder, and the exclusive executive director of Apex Holdings LLC is my client Charmaine." The courtroom descended into a state of absolute profound shock. You could have easily heard a single pin drop on the carpeted floor. I sat perfectly still at the defense table, keeping my expression completely devoid of any sympathetic emotion. I simply watched my mother's entire universe violently implode. Charmaine secretly bought the house 4 years ago, preventing the bank from physically throwing her own mother out into the street. Harrison continued relentlessly. Since that day, she has allowed Vivian to comfortably reside in the massive luxury estate under a highly specific $0 courtesy lease agreement. Charmaine is the undisputed legal landlord. Vivian is nothing more than an unpaid charity tenant living entirely out of the sheer financial grace of the daughter she is currently attempting to sue. The devastating absolute truth was finally out. For 4 entire years, my mother had arrogantly paraded around that massive luxury home, treating me like an absolute worthless peasant. She had repeatedly insulted my career, belittled my financial status, and constantly compared me to my supposedly successful sister Chloe. She had confidently told her wealthy socialite friends that I was a massive disappointment. She had physically thrown me out into the freezing rain and proudly declared that I was completely dead to her. She had done all of this incredibly toxic abusive behavior while actively sleeping under a roof that I legally owned. She was eating food from a refrigerator that I secretly purchased. She was sitting on expensive designer furniture that my corporate salary had completely secured. Her entire arrogant high society existence was nothing more than a massive charitable donation strictly funded by my hard work. Vivian let out a strangled, horrific gasp. She stumbled backward, her designer high heels catching awkwardly on the courtroom carpet. She fell heavily into her hard wooden chair, clutching her chest as if she could not physically breathe the air in the room. Her eyes darted frantically around the silent courtroom, desperately searching for someone, anyone to tell her this was just a terrible, terrifying nightmare. She looked at Reginald, but her cheap television lawyer was currently staring down at his messy shoes, completely, utterly defeated. She looked over at Trey, but the manipulative grifter was already slowly inching his chair away from her, instantly realizing that his ultimate financial meal ticket had just completely evaporated. Finally, she looked directly at me. I did not offer her a warm, comforting smile. I did not offer her a single shred of emotional forgiveness. I simply sat there in my expensive tailored slate gray suit, looking at the completely broken, bankrupt woman who had repeatedly tried to destroy my life. Judge Sterling removed her wire-rimmed glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose, clearly disgusted by the sheer magnitude of the plaintiff's overwhelming deceit. Let me ensure I fully understand this completely absurd situation, the judge said, her voice ringing with absolute judicial authority. You have aggressively brought this woman into my courtroom. You have maliciously accused her of massive financial elder abuse. You have actively sued her for $2 million in severe emotional distress. And you have formally demanded a permanent legal restraining order to ban her from a massive property that she actually fully owns. You are actively attempting to use this judicial court to illegally evict your own landlord. Vivian could not even formulate a coherent sentence. She opened her mouth, but only a sharp, pathetic whining sound escaped her throat. She looked exactly like a deflated balloon. The grand, wealthy matriarch of the family had been completely exposed as a desperate broke fraud who had viciously bitten the only hand that had ever truly fed her. The $0 courtesy lease agreement was a highly specific legal contract that Harrison had meticulously drafted exactly 4 years ago. It included incredibly strict behavioral clauses that Vivian had unknowingly violated the exact moment she formally filed this completely frivolous lawsuit. By legally attacking the primary property owner and maliciously attempting to seize corporate assets through a fraudulent civil complaint, the courtesy lease was immediately rendered completely null and void. She had quite literally sued herself out of a multi-million-dollar free housing arrangement. The absolute poetic justice of the situation was almost overwhelmingly beautiful. My mother had built a towering, fragile house of cards, completely entirely on a foundation of my silent financial generosity. And with a single stack of certified county property deeds, I had effortlessly blown the entire pathetic structure right to the ground. The heavy silence in the courtroom stretched on for what felt like an absolute eternity. Everyone was simply staring at the complete, total destruction of a woman who had allowed her blinding, toxic greed to completely consume her. The first massive domino had officially violently fallen, and the brutal, relentless chain reaction was only just beginning. Before anyone could fully process the absolute magnitude of Vivian's spectacular downfall, Trey desperately attempted to regain control of the rapidly deteriorating situation. He leaned over the polished wooden table and aggressively whispered into Reginald's ear, frantically pointing at the messy pile of legal documents. Reginald swallowed hard, his face glistening with nervous sweat. He hesitantly stood up, straightening his cheap tie. "Your Honor." Reginald stammered, his voice lacking all of its previous arrogant bravado. "Even if the defendant technically owns the physical property, my client still suffered massive emotional distress. Furthermore, the defendant maliciously froze their primary lines of credit and actively engaged in severe defamation, effectively ruining my client's brilliant son-in-law's highly lucrative tech startup. We are still demanding financial compensation for the targeted destruction of his business reputation." Harrison did not even bother to sit down. He simply reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out the pristine black binder containing the extensive 50-page forensic financial audit compiled by Julian. "Your Honor." Harrison interjected, his voice cutting through Reginald's pathetic legal pivoting like a sharp surgical blade. "The defense completely rejects any claims of defamation or intentional financial sabotage. You cannot legally defame a reputation that is entirely constructed on a massive foundation of federal wire fraud and severe financial deceit." Harrison approached the bench once again, handing the black binder directly to the bailiff. "I am officially submitting a comprehensive forensic financial audit conducted by a highly decorated former federal investigator. This document completely details the actual source of the plaintiff's supposed emotional distress and financial ruin, and I assure this court that my client Charmaine had absolutely nothing to do with it." Judge Sterling accepted the heavy black binder, her judicial curiosity clearly piqued by the sudden dramatic escalation. She flipped open the cover and began reading the executive summary. Her eyes widened slightly as she quickly scanned the undeniable mathematical proof of Trey's massive criminal liability. She looked over the top of her wire-rimmed glasses directly at Trey, who was suddenly gripping the edges of the plaintiff's table so hard his knuckles were completely white. Counselor Judge Sterling said, addressing Harrison while maintaining her intense, unblinking stare on Trey. Would you care to summarize the specific findings of this forensic audit for the official public court record? Harrison nodded, adjusting his tailored suit jacket. Gladly, Your Honor. Harrison replied, turning to face the gallery and the absolutely terrified plaintiffs. The individual sitting at that table, claiming to be a highly successful technology entrepreneur, is nothing more than a desperate broke con artist. Trey does not own a revolutionary artificial intelligence cryptocurrency platform. He operates a highly illegal classic Ponzi scheme. He has been aggressively soliciting cash from amateur retail investors, including several elderly members of his own extended family, and deliberately funneling those funds directly into his personal checking accounts to blindly finance his lavish lifestyle. A collective gasp echoed from the few family members who had actually shown up to support Vivian in the courtroom gallery. Auntie Denise, who had aggressively texted me hateful messages just a few days prior, suddenly stood up from the wooden bench, her eyes wide with sheer panic as she realized her personal investment was entirely gone. Order in the court. Judge Sterling commanded, banging her wooden gavel once. Proceed with your summary, counselor. Harrison paced slowly in front of the defense table, radiating absolute lethal confidence. Not only is Trey completely broke and actively defrauding his own family members, but his deep financial desperation led him to commit egregious acts of bank fraud right under the nose of his mother-in-law. My mother. Vivian slowly raised her head, looking at Harrison with a deeply confused and thoroughly terrified expression. What are you talking about? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the courtroom air conditioning. Harrison looked directly into my mother's tear-filled eyes, showing absolutely zero mercy. According to the certified bank records included in Exhibit C of the audit, Trey recently forged your exact legal signature on a massive stack of highly sensitive financial loan documents. He used your stolen identity to fraudulently take out a massive $200,000 second mortgage on the family estate. Vivian violently gasped, clutching her chest. But the absolute best part of this particular felony? Harrison continued, a sharp, predatory smile playing on his lips, is that Trey was too incredibly ignorant to run a basic title search before committing the massive identity theft. He fraudulently attempted to secure a second mortgage on a massive luxury property that you did not even legally own. The bank approved the massive high-interest loan based entirely on the completely forged documents, and Trey immediately squandered every single penny of that stolen money on his failing crypto scheme. He effectively handed the federal government all the absolute undeniable proof they need to immediately arrest him for massive felony bank fraud and aggravated identity theft. Trey violently leaped out of his chair, his face burning bright red. That is a complete lie, he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Harrison. She fabricated all of those documents. She is just trying to completely ruin me because she is bitterly jealous of my success. Judge Sterling slammed her heavy wooden gavel down so hard the loud crack sounded like a gunshot. Sit down. Right this second, young man, Judge Sterling bellowed, her voice vibrating with intense, furious authority. You will not disrupt my courtroom with your pathetic screaming. Trey slowly sank back into his hard wooden chair, looking exactly like a cornered, terrified animal. But the brutal, relentless execution was still not completely over. I had saved the absolute most personal and deeply devastating revelation for the very end. Harrison casually flipped to the final page of his detailed legal notes. Furthermore, Your Honor. Harrison said, his voice dropping to a low, highly dramatic register to fully illustrate the sheer depths of this man's profound financial depravity. We have submitted a certified digital copy of a local pawnshop receipt dated exactly 2 months ago. In a desperate, pathetic attempt to quickly cover his massive mounting criminal debts, Trey completely betrayed his own wife. He secretly removed his wife's authentic custom-designed platinum diamond wedding ring from her jewelry box. He pawned the authentic diamond for $8,000 in fast cash and quietly replaced the center stone with a completely worthless piece of cheap manufactured cubic zirconia. Chloe completely froze in her chair. The courtroom went absolutely silent, watching her raise her left hand into the sterile, fluorescent lighting. Her trembling fingers gently touched the massive, glowing center stone she had proudly bragged about to thousands of gullible internet followers for the past 2 months. She stared at the cheap manufactured glass, instantly realizing the absolute truth. The brilliant reflection she thought she saw was nothing more than a pathetic illusion created by the manipulative man sitting directly next to her. The perfect golden child suddenly shattered into a million jagged pieces right in front of my eyes. Chloe let out an agonizing scream that violently echoed off the high marble walls. It was pure, unadulterated heartbreak, mixed with explosive homicidal rage. "You stole my wedding ring!" she shrieked, turning her entire body to face her terrified husband. "You completely ruined my life. You broke, disgusting loser!" Before Trey could raise his hands to properly defend himself, Chloe lunged violently across the plaintiff's table. She aggressively grabbed him tightly by the collar of his cheap suit, completely ripping the fabric. She viciously slapped him directly across the face with incredible physical force. The loud, sharp smack resonated throughout the entire stunned courtroom. Trey yelped in sheer pain, desperately trying to push his screaming wife off of his bleeding face. Chloe did not stop. She wildly swung her fists blindly, hitting his chest, his shoulders, and his neck, screaming completely incomprehensible insults at the top of her lungs. The courtroom instantly descended into absolute, pure, unhinged chaos. My mother, Vivian, buried her face deeply in her trembling hands, aggressively sobbing loudly as she watched her perfect, flawless family completely tear each other apart like wild rabid animals. Reginald, the cheap television lawyer, quickly backed away from the violent physical altercation, looking incredibly terrified for his own personal safety. "Bailiff, restrain that woman immediately!" Judge Sterling commanded, rapidly banging her wooden gavel repeatedly to restore basic legal order. The tall, heavily armed court bailiff quickly rushed forward from the heavy side door. He forcefully grabbed Chloe by her shaking shoulders, physically ripping her away from her completely battered, bleeding husband. He dragged her kicking and screaming to the far opposite side of the large courtroom. The absolute perfect golden couple, the brilliant tech entrepreneur, and the stunning social media influencer, was completely permanently shattered in exactly 60 seconds. Trey was sitting slumped heavily in his wooden chair, bleeding slightly from a deep scratch right beneath his left eye, gasping heavily for fresh air. Chloe was aggressively hyperventilating, loudly sobbing against the hard marble wall, tightly clutching her completely fake, worthless glass ring. I sat perfectly, completely still at the defense table, calmly watching the total, absolute destruction unfold. It took nearly 10 full minutes for the heavy courtroom doors to close and for the chaotic adrenaline to finally dissipate. The bailiff had physically removed my sister Chloe from the premises, entirely placing her in a temporary holding cell to cool down. Trey remained slumped in his wooden chair, pressing a wad of white tissues against his bleeding cheek, looking thoroughly defeated. My mother, Vivian, was still quietly sobbing into her hands, completely overwhelmed by the rapid, brutal dismantling of her supposedly perfect golden family. Reginald, the cheap television lawyer, looked like he was ready to sprint out of the nearest emergency exit. He nervously shuffled his remaining papers, avoiding all eye contact with the bench. Judge Sterling sat high above the wreckage, her face a mask of absolute judicial fury. She took a deep breath, adjusted her glasses, and banged her gavel one single time to demand total silence. "We have just witnessed a deeply disturbing display of domestic violence and profound financial fraud in this courtroom," Judge Sterling stated, her voice echoing coldly. "But we still have one final unresolved legal matter to address on the official public record. The plaintiff has formally accused the defendant of severe elder abuse and the malicious theft of a $2 million family trust fund." "Counselor." She looked directly at Reginald. "Do you have a single shred of actual verifiable evidence to support this incredibly serious federal allegation?" Reginald slowly stood up, his knees visibly trembling beneath his cheap suit trousers. "Your Honor, my client firmly believes that her late mother would never intentionally leave her entirely destitute." Reginald stammered, his voice lacking any real conviction. The $2 million trust fund was explicitly meant for Vivian. The defendant, Charmaine clearly used aggressive psychological manipulation to coerce her dying grandmother into altering the final legal documents. Therefore, my client is still legally entitled to massive financial compensation. Before Reginald could even finish his pathetic, desperate sentence, Harrison was already standing tall at the defense table. Your Honor, the defense vehemently denies these completely baseless and deeply offensive accusations, Harrison proclaimed. Not only did my client Charmaine provide impeccable, loving care for her late grandmother, but she also strictly followed every explicit legal directive outlined in the final authenticated will. Harrison reached into his leather briefcase one final time. He pulled out a sealed ivory envelope bearing the official wax stamp of a prominent Atlanta estate attorney. I am submitting the original unedited final will and testament of the late grandmother, along with the highly specific operational guidelines of the $2 million trust fund in question. The bailiff carefully transported the ivory envelope to Judge Sterling. She broke the wax seal and unfolded the thick parchment paper. The entire courtroom held its collective breath as she read the late matriarch's final legal wishes. Vivian slowly lowered her hands from her tear-stained face, looking up at the bench with a tiny sliver of desperate hope. She genuinely believed her mother had secretly loved her the most. She thought the documents would finally prove her lifelong delusion. Judge Sterling finished reading the primary page and let out a heavy, highly disappointed sigh. She looked directly down at Vivian, her judicial patience completely exhausted. Plaintiff. This official legal document paints a drastically different picture than the fictional narrative you have presented today, Judge Sterling said strictly. Would you like me to read your late mother's exact words aloud for the official court record? Or would you prefer to silently withdraw this frivolous lawsuit right now? Vivian swallowed hard, her pride refusing to let her surrender. Read it, Vivian whispered, her voice cracking. Judge Sterling cleared her throat and began reading the final legally binding statement of my grandmother. I leave the entirety of my $2 million estate and all associated liquid assets strictly under the exclusive financial control of my granddaughter Charmaine. I specifically and intentionally exclude my daughter Vivian from receiving any direct inheritance or lump sum cash payouts. Vivian has repeatedly demonstrated a catastrophic inability to manage finances. If given access to this wealth, she will undoubtedly squander the entire family legacy on frivolous luxury goods and hollow social status. I trust Charmaine to protect this legacy with her brilliant financial mind and her unwavering moral compass. The brutal, undeniable truth of those words hit Vivian like a physical freight train. Her own mother, the woman she claimed to love and honor, had officially documented her absolute financial incompetence on the permanent legal record. My grandmother had seen completely through Vivian's shallow high society facade and legally diagnosed her as a massive financial liability. Vivian slumped forward in her wooden chair, her face turning a deep shade of crimson red from the overwhelming public humiliation. She had brought this ridiculous lawsuit to boldly prove that I was a malicious thief. Instead, she successfully forced the court to loudly broadcast her own mother's profound, deep-seated disappointment in her. But the absolute final nail in the coffin was still waiting to be hammered into place. Harrison turned directly to face Vivian, leaning slightly forward, resting his hands on the defense table. Since you brought up the specific management of your daily living expenses, Vivian, I think it is incredibly important that the court fully understands exactly how you have survived for the past 5 years. Harrison stated, his voice smooth but incredibly lethal. You claimed in your lawsuit that Charmaine stole your inheritance to live a fake rich lifestyle while leaving you destitute. But the certified financial ledgers we submitted prove the exact opposite. Harrison picked up a thick stack of printed bank statements, holding them high in the air for the entire courtroom to clearly see. The $2 million trust fund has remained completely untouched, heavily invested in high-yield conservative corporate bonds, Harrison explained. It has not paid out a single penny for your luxury cars, your expensive designer clothing, or your exclusive country club memberships. Vivian stared at the bank statements, her brow furrowing in deep, absolute confusion. If the trust fund was completely untouched, Then where exactly was the money coming from? How had she maintained her lavish, wealthy lifestyle for half a decade if her late husband left her entirely broke and her mother left her absolutely nothing? Harrison delivered the ultimate flex with devastating surgical precision. Every single dollar that has funded your extravagant lifestyle for the past 5 years has come directly out of Charmaine's personal corporate salary, Harrison declared, his voice echoing powerfully. She secretly paid your massive debts. She quietly covered your exorbitant shopping sprees. She allowed you to live rent-free in her multi-million-dollar estate. She did all of this completely anonymously to protect your fragile pride and maintain your precious high society illusion. She sacrificed her own hard-earned wealth so you would never have to face the terrifying reality of your own complete financial failure. And you repaid her incredible generosity by calling her a parasite, kicking her out into the street, and attempting to permanently destroy her corporate career. The total absolute reality of her pathetic existence finally crashed down upon Vivian. She was not a powerful, wealthy matriarch. She was not a victim of elder abuse. She was an incredibly ignorant, ungrateful dependent who had been actively biting the very hand that kept her from starving in the streets. She had proudly sued the only person on the entire planet who had secretly cared enough to protect her. She looked over at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of sheer terror, profound regret, and absolute shattering humiliation. She opened her mouth to speak, to perhaps finally apologize, but no words came out. The sheer magnitude of her toxic mistakes had rendered her completely, entirely mute. She had absolutely nothing left. Her favorite golden daughter was currently sitting in a jail cell for assault. Her supposed brilliant son-in-law was about to be federally indicted for massive wire fraud. Her house belonged to me. Her money belonged to me. Her entire fake glamorous life was nothing more than a charitable illusion that I had meticulously maintained. And now the illusion was permanently, completely dead. Judge Sterling closed the heavy leather binder with a loud, sharp snap that made everyone in the courtroom jump. She looked down at Vivian and Reginald with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. In all my years sitting on this judicial bench, I have never witnessed such a vile, blatant, and utterly pathetic attempt at legal extortion, Judge Sterling announced, her voice ringing with absolute finality. You came into my courtroom armed with forged documents, fabricated emotional distress, and profound, blinding greed. You attempted to use the legal system to aggressively ruin a highly successful, generous woman who did absolutely nothing but quietly support your completely unsustainable lifestyle. This court will not tolerate such egregious abuses of the judicial process. I am officially dismissing this entire civil lawsuit with extreme prejudice. You are permanently barred from ever bringing these ridiculous claims back into my courtroom. Furthermore, I am ordering the plaintiff to cover all associated legal fees and court costs incurred by the defense. This hearing is officially adjourned. Judge Sterling slammed her wooden gavel down incredibly hard, officially ending the massive legal slaughter. She stood up from the bench and quickly exited the courtroom, leaving behind a heavy, completely suffocating silence. Reginald immediately packed his cheap briefcase, practically sprinting down the center aisle, desperate to escape the massive, toxic fallout. Trey remained slumped in his chair, completely paralyzed by the terrifying prospect of his impending federal arrest. Vivian sat entirely frozen at the plaintiff's table, staring blankly ahead at the polished wood surface. She looked deeply exhausted, utterly broken, and completely hollowed out. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for her. I stood up from the defense table, smoothing my tailored slate gray suit. I thanked Harrison for his flawless execution. I walked slowly around the heavy wooden tables directly toward my mother. I did not yell. I did not gloat. I stopped right next to her chair. She looked up at me, her eyes bloodshot and filled with silent pleading. I reached into my briefcase, pulling out a single crisp white paper. I dropped it gently onto the desk right directly in front of her trembling hands. This is a formal certified 48-hour eviction notice, I said, my voice ice cold and completely empty of human emotion. You have exactly 2 days to pack whatever cheap items you actually own and vacate my property entirely. If you are not completely gone by Friday morning, I will have the Fulton County Sheriff's Department physically throw you and your remaining garbage onto the public sidewalk. Do not ever attempt to contact me again." I turned my back on her complete ruin and confidently walked out of the courtroom, leaving her to finally face the devastating consequences of her own blinding toxic greed. I walked out of the heavy double doors of courtroom 4 feeling lighter than I had in a decade. Harrison and Eleanor flanked me their expensive briefcases, packed with the undeniable evidence of my complete victory. The marble hallway was quiet, but the real chaos was waiting for us just outside. We pushed through the revolving glass doors, stepping into the bright afternoon sunlight. The immediate aftermath of the trial was already unfolding on the concrete steps. Trey had sprinted out of the building, desperate to escape. He did not get far. Waiting at the bottom of the wide stone steps were 4 men in dark suits. They were federal agents assigned to financial crimes. As Trey rushed down, looking frantically for his rented Maserati, 2 federal agents stepped directly into his path. Trey froze, his eyes darting wildly like a trapped rat. I stood at the top of the courthouse steps, calmly watching the incredibly satisfying scene play out. An agent pulled out a silver badge, flashing it directly in Trey's sweating face. We could hear the agent clearly read him his Miranda rights, loudly citing multiple counts of federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and massive bank fraud. Trey did not fight back. The arrogant, obnoxious grifter who had constantly mocked my corporate career simply crumbled. He let out a pathetic whimper as heavy steel handcuffs clicked loudly around his wrists. They violently shoved him into the back of an unmarked SUV. Chloe burst through the heavy courthouse doors, just in time to witness the entire arrest. She ran down the concrete steps, screaming her husband's name, but it was far too late. She collapsed onto the dirty street curb, burying her face in her manicured hands, sobbing hysterically. Her fake, glamorous world was permanently destroyed. Her wealthy husband was a federally indicted criminal. Her entire curated internet persona was a massive, toxic lie. My mother, Vivian, slowly walked out of the courthouse moments later. She stood near the top of the steps, clutching her designer purse, looking utterly terrified. She stared blankly at her golden child crying on the curb, entirely unable to offer a single word of comfort. I simply adjusted my sunglasses, turned toward my waiting Maybach, and instructed my driver to take me back to my corporate office. Exactly 1 month later, I was standing on the expansive private balcony of my midtown penthouse. The warm evening breeze blew gently across the massive outdoor terrace. I was holding a crystal glass of expensive red wine, looking out over the glittering skyline of the city I had completely conquered. My corporate career was thriving better than ever before. The internal compliance audit had completely exonerated me, praising my immaculate financial record. Meanwhile, my toxic family faced the brutal, unyielding force of reality. The county sheriff had formally evicted my mother from the family estate. Apex Holdings, LLC, immediately sold the luxury property for a massive profit. As I took a slow sip of my wine, my personal cell phone buzzed loudly on the outdoor patio table. I glanced down at the glowing digital screen. It was an unknown number, but I immediately knew exactly who was calling. I calmly picked up the sleek device, swiping to accept the incoming call. I did not say hello. I just listened closely to the heavy, desperate breathing on the line. "Charmaine, please do not hang up the phone, my mother!" Vivian sobbed, her voice cracking with profound, overwhelming desperation. "Please, you have to help me. I am currently staying in a disgusting cheap motel out by the highway, and I cannot even afford to pay for another single night." Chloe completely abandoned me. She packed her bags and moved out of state the second Trey was officially indicted. She took whatever little cash we had left and entirely blocked my number. "I have absolutely nowhere else to go. I am so sorry. Please just let me come stay with you." I listened to her pathetic, desperate crying. A year ago, hearing my mother cry would have absolutely shattered my heart. I would have instantly transferred thousands of dollars to save her. But the independent woman standing on that penthouse balcony was not the naive girl who desperately craved her mother's toxic conditional approval. I took another slow sip of my red wine, savoring the deep flavor, looking out at the beautiful glowing city lights completely untouched by her manufactured emergency. You wanted me out of your house, Mother, I said, my voice perfectly calm, level, and incredibly cold. Now we both got what we wanted. I simply pulled the phone away, firmly pressing the red end call button, cutting off her frantic screaming. I immediately went into my secure settings and permanently blocked the unknown number, ensuring she could never disrupt my absolute peace again. I placed the phone down on the glass table, taking a deep cleansing breath. The heavy toxic weight was finally entirely gone forever. If you are listening to this story right now and you are currently bleeding yourself completely dry to please people who only tolerate your existence, I need you to hear this loud and clear. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. Never allow anyone to weaponize your own success against you. Never set yourself entirely on fire just to keep toxic, ungrateful people warm. Do not let fear stop you from demanding basic respect. Walk away from anyone who views your kindness as a profound weakness. Your life is completely yours to carefully control and brilliantly build. You have the absolute right to fiercely protect your peace, your wealth, and your brilliant future. Thank you so much for following along. If my story resonated, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content. Please share this video with your friends today. Drop a comment below sharing your experiences with setting unbreakable boundaries. Stay incredibly strong, always thrive, and remember your ultimate success is the absolute best revenge.